Hello, hello, everyone. I am so excited for tonight's discussion. It is all about breaking the stigma surrounding mental health and why that's important for not only mental health advocates, but for us to have open and honest conversations about it. And I am so excited to talk with my guest, Charise. She is an author and a mental health advocate. She wrote a book called Crazy, a memoir of a mom gone mad, all about her journey. And then she also wrote another book called Normal for kids to be able to learn how to break the stigma and also have honest conversations about it. I am so excited.
Hello.
Hey, do you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Oh
you.
my gosh, it's amazing. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on tonight.
No, you are good. You're good. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Yes, of course. Like it's so amazing. Like I really admire the work that you do and all that you've accomplished. Like and just like any like accolades and everything. Like I'm just so in awe of you. So thank you for
Oh, thank you. And same right back at you. I've been looking at your feed a lot lately just to like research a little bit, but it's amazing everything you do. So thank you.
I appreciate that so much. So tonight we're talking all of what it means to break the stigma and why that is so important. So before we dive right into the conversation, tell us a little bit about you.
So you were just saying dive right into, and then it died.
Oh, okay. So I was saying before we dive right in, about like you and like all the work that you do and yeah, just who you are.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Yeah, so my name is Charise Jewell. I'm an author. I used to be a robotics engineer. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. And in 2017, I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 when I was in a severe manic episode, which was my first. I was 40 years old. So since then, it took me about at least 3 years to feel any sort of like stability and control again after my diagnosis. And during that time period, I'd been working on a book. So I wrote a memoir, which I released in 2021. I'm going to show it. It's called Crazy, Memoir of a Mom Gone Mad. It's my story about my manic episodes. I ended up having another one after the first one, hospitalization, parenting with this new illness, and dealing with healthcare, stigma, everything that I had to learn to come to terms with in that time. And then after that, I wrote another book. This one, I only have my author copy of it, but it's called Normal. This one is also about mental illness, but it's for kids. I wrote it because when I was diagnosed, I always turned to books as my first learning tool and support tool. And I couldn't find anything for my kids that was like geared to their anywhere near their age groups. So I wrote that one with kids in mind who needed this kind of information. And that one was just released last year in 2023.
Nice. That is
Thanks.
and I love that you had kids in mind too, you know?
Yeah, well, the next generation is the one who are going to really do their best to fix it, right? To fix all of these problems we're having. So
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick off the conversation, Grace, I wanted to ask, why do you think it's important to break the stigma? Because we all hear like break the stigma, like we need to break it, the stigma, smash the stigma. So why do you think that is important?
that's such a good question. So for me personally, I knew it was important myself based on my own experiences because back almost 20 years ago now, when I was pregnant with my first baby, I had a miscarriage and it was devastating to me. And what made it even harder was that it was so secretive. Nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody asked me. Nobody talked about it. Like it was just like shameful because it was such a secret. And I was lucky. I found a support group at the time where I could talk openly and there was no judgment and I could recover and grieve properly. So as soon as I was diagnosed with bipolar, I knew like I feel really embarrassed. I feel really ashamed of this. And it was those same kind of feelings where I thought, but hold on a sec, like I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything wrong. This is an illness like any other illness. It's just that nobody talks about it or not enough people are talking about it. And like, so since then, I've talked about it a lot with my kids, and it's become, at first, it was very awkward even in my house to talk about it. Like, nobody wanted to upset me if they talked about it. They were afraid of like my reaction, and I wasn't sure how they would feel. So it was very awkward. But the more we just kind of tackled it together, and it really took me talking about it a little bit more before they could feel open to talk about it. But it just lost all power. There's no more like embarrassment or like secrecy or anything in our house. And so it just, to me, it feels like that's true of society. Like society, stigma only exists because people don't know, and there's fear of the unknown for any kind of stigma. So if we talk about what people are afraid of and share information and smash the stigma, it just won't be an issue anymore. Really, that's how I feel.
Yes, yes, I definitely agree. And something that you said where it lost all power, you know? Because a lot of the times, like, especially when you first get diagnosed, like, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, like, when I first got diagnosed, like, I was so devastated because all I knew about bipolar disorder was the negative connotations to that. Like, you know, the weather is so bipolar. If it's sunny, then rainy. Or if someone, like, had a change of emotion, you're so bipolar. Like, it wasn't anything good. But in learning about it, and like you said, raising awareness about it, like, it helps it to become less scary and less, like you said, of an embarrassment and shame, you know?
Exactly. You're exactly right. Because all I knew was negative from like exactly those kind of cliche descriptions, or in movies, like whatever, you know, how we're represented. Like it's just wrong. Like it's just wrong that that's the only thing that anyone might know if they know anything about bipolar.
Right, right. I definitely agree. Speaking of, like, you know, media and everything like that, your book, like, a little bit more about why you wrote your memoir and like how you feel that it worked to break that stigma.
Oh boy, you're asking good ones. Okay, well, so you actually like taking the power out of this is true in so many different situations. And so for me, when I named my book Crazy, like the name is crazy, and I really don't like that word crazy. It's really obviously taken on a new meaning since I was diagnosed. And you know, you hear it everywhere. Like you hear it all over the place. Everything is described as crazy. Like you couldn't have a conversation or go half an hour in a day without hearing something described, without hearing something that's described as crazy or insane or mad or any of these. So when actually I had a book, I think the strain must coffee. I just want to explain because I wanted to take the power out of that word for me when my editor actually suggested this title for me, and I was like, oh, I cringed at the thought of it because I can't use that word. Like I don't use that word. So for me, that was another part of taking the power out of something, was like reclaiming that word as something that's like I can use it how I want to because like this is me. Like I have bipolar disorder. It doesn't mean I'm crazy. It doesn't, like let's just rethink words matter, right? Let's rethink how we use words. But so I've started writing my book. Really, I'm holding it like just because I like to hold it. So I just that's why I keep looking down here. It's kind of to make me focus a little. I started writing it as therapy, to be honest. I started just getting everything out on the page. I had horrible moments in the hospital. I had some good moments, but I had forgotten a lot. I had a lot of blackouts. So I started writing things down whenever I thought of something that I wanted to remember, or if I was feeling a particularly strong emotion and I wanted to try to just get it out. And after maybe even a year, 8 months to a year of doing that, I started kind of putting it together like, you know, this could really be like something. It could be useful to somebody because I always have turned to books, like I said. And one of the first things I did, maybe took 6 months or so after I was out of the hospital, I started looking up memoirs of people who had bipolar disorder. And I found some that were so helpful. The first one I found, if anyone wants a suggestion, I recommend this one all the time. It's called Fast Girl. And I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but I can't. And that's terrible because I know all the time it'll come to me. But it's a story of a woman who had bipolar and she used to be an Olympic athlete. So her story was very like inspiring. And then she just crashed and burned. And like it was just awful. Like when she was diagnosed, everything was horrible. And so it made me feel comforted. Like it just really made me feel like I didn't do anything that like awful in my life. I didn't mess up my life to the point where I can't recover it. She didn't either. But I just felt like this is a really awful situation. And like, so I can relate to, and at the same time, mine wasn't as bad. So I feel a little bit better that mine wasn't as bad. So I could, yeah. So because I read memoirs, I was like, I'm going to write something. I'm going to try to get it out there to help other people who might need something. And maybe they don't find this particular one. I'm really trying to think of her name, and it's on the tip of my tongue. It's so frustrating to me. I have to look it up. In order to so to the end part of your question, in terms of breaking stigma, like I don't think I'm breaking stigma alone. We're all breaking stigma together. And my book is just it's my way of doing it. You know, you have a podcast, which is amazing, and hopefully we're all reaching people in the different ways they want to be reached.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely what you said about like reading other people's like memoirs and hearing other people's stories, like that also for me, like before I started the podcast, like seeing like wonderful people who are advocating and like sharing their own experiences, that really touched me and it made me feel less alone. And I think that's like a part of it too. Like when we get like more confident in sharing our experiences, it could really help somebody feel like they're less alone. And that's
Absolutely.
yeah, like that's why I wanted to start like the podcast and like get connected with people like yourself and others who are active, like sharing their experiences and wanting to have open and honest conversations. Because when you feel isolated, that like creates a huge burden and it makes managing this a lot harder.
100%. Yeah. When I also started like going on Instagram and finding people, when I was first diagnosed, I wasn't on Instagram. I didn't know like this kind of a community existed on social media, but finding people like you and other people who, you know, were in the same kind of hashtag groups, I guess, I really started to feel like there's a lot of support here and it's great. It's really appreciated. I remember her name. I knew it would come to me when I stopped trying to force it, but it's Susie Favor Hamilton. She was a U.S. Olympic athlete. Yeah.
I should look into that one for sure.
Like fun. Yeah. I mean, it's sad and good in the same way the best memoirs are, I think. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so speaking of memoirs, going back to your memoir, it's like you talked a lot about hospitalization, and I'm curious, like what made you want to talk about, because that's not even talked about, like the hospitalization part of like recovery. So what made you decide to talk about that, and why did you like choose that particular moment to put in the memoir?
Well, so there were two. I was hospitalized twice. And the first time, so one of the reasons I wanted to share my hospital experiences, there were a few reasons. One is that it's just not talked about. Like people just, you know, we talk about grippy socks, which I never got grippy socks either of my hospitalization. So I don't know if that's a thing. I don't know. But anyway, that's what I hear a lot about hospitals. And it's so secretive. So I wanted to like kind of open up the talking about that too, to kind of break the stigma of the psych ward, because it's like, it's just this like psych ward. Like even the term is, you know, very negative sounding. So I wanted to talk about it, but even more than that, I wanted to share just how I felt, because my first hospitalization was when I was first diagnosed. It was both times it was right at Mother's Day, 1 year apart. So the first time I went, I was like worn out. Like I was manic, but I was also really exhausted. And I remember being hospitalized, and I wrote about it in my book, and I would walk around like, oh, this is like a mommy spa. Like I get to take a break from the laundry and the cooking, and like, oh, this is like my Mother's Day gift to myself. Like I was all ha 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 about it. It felt very like kind of funny when I was still manic. And then the rest of that time, it was fine. Like I can't really remember anything. I mean, I remember a lot of things about that experience that really were important to me to get into my book, just in terms of sharing, like everybody in the psych ward who I interacted with, like we were all just people, and there was nothing like bad or evil, or like there was nothing to be afraid of with anyone I spoke to. Like I just wanted to get that across. So I wrote that for my first experience. And then my second experience 1 year later, so I'd already been diagnosed the year before, and I hadn't been taking my medication properly, and everyone knew that. So they were very cruel. I think the staff were cruel to me because it wasn't like a new, oh, well, we're trying to figure out what's wrong with you and we're going to run an MRI. Like there weren't any niceties. It wasn't like, you didn't take your meds, now you're stuck back here again, like this is on you. And it was very cruel. So I go into that a lot in my book, and there was some really abusive treatment like the second time I was there by the staff, and I wanted to write that because that's also not talked about in terms of, like, nothing about the psych ward is really talked about. And I mean, I was so vulnerable, and I'm very privileged. I'm a lucky person, and I have like a family who loves me and cares for me, and they were there like checking in with me, and still I was abused. Like, I was really horrified by how, in my case, and I think in a lot of people's cases, security can really hurt people and just get away with it because it's the mentally ill. So nobody will believe. I felt at the time, I still feel. I mean, I went into a lot of details about it in my book. Like, I was not believed by anyone. For even my husband was doubting me for a while about some of the claims I was making, which I knew were true. And some of them I knew there was maybe a gray area of, I might have been hallucinating, or, I was psychotic at the time. So maybe that didn't happen. But some of them absolutely happened. And I was explaining them exactly like this is, and I even had proofs for some things, and still like there was no belief. Like, so it's just awful. It was awful to me that this exists and people experience this every day and nobody talks about it. And I was angry. I wanted to express that in my book. I wanted to really shine a light on it because it's so harmful. This is our healthcare system. Like, this is what's supposed to be taking care of us. So.
Yeah. Wow. First off, I'm sorry that you went through that. That was like, you didn't deserve that. And also, it's so like ironic that the healthcare system, like you said, we're supposed to be getting our care, is like perpetuate that stigma even further. Because like, even when I was in the hospital too, like I felt like people were looking at me a type of way that were to me like I had a cognitive deficiency. Like, listen, like I knew what I was talking about. Yeah, had a mental breakdown and manic episode, but after adjusting treatment, like I know what I'm talking about. I know where I am oriented. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's kind of sad that even in a hospital setting, like people are still looking at like people who have mental health conditions as, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or are you sure this happened? That's just unnecessarily cruel,
Yeah, I'm sorry you experienced that as well. Well, that's serious. It is unnecessarily cruel. I agree.
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost like, in a place where that's the first place that you go to get that type of like immediate care. It's like when you're going through a manic episode or even like psychosis, like you're going through like something that's so traumatic to your body and your system that you go to the hospital so they're able to help you get adjusted. The fact that that's your first, initial like care, it's kind of scary to me that
It's definitely scary.
yeah.
It's definitely scary. I will say, so I was in Alberta at the time, and now I'm in Ontario. And so I had a psychiatrist in Alberta, and I have another one in Toronto who is absolutely amazing. Like, I love my psychiatrist so much. He's been so helpful and supportive since we moved here in 2018. So I'm very lucky to have that. I would be incredibly reluctant to go back to the hospital. Like, even given that I have this amazing psychiatrist, it's just knowing what happened to me the second time, like what would happen to me the third time, it's awful. Like, yeah, it's really a bad state.
Yeah. And like you said, the contrast too, like the first time you go to the hospital, like, everyone was like, okay, let's run the MRI.
Yeah, they were so nice. Everyone was like, oh, happy Mother's Day. Like, everyone was just lovely. Like, it was like really, really nice treatment. And then it's like, as soon as they know what you have, and especially because I hadn't been taking my medication properly, then it was like, oh, it's your fault. Which, come on, like, is it really? Like, it was 1 year after my diagnosis. I was told by my psychiatrist, this is one of the things that really got me at the time. They were really angry at me for not taking my medication. My psychiatrist was really angry with me. And he had told me 1 year before that within a year, I think it was 70%, it was a really high statistic of people stop taking their medication. So when he had told me that a year before, and then I did it like a year later, why is he angry? Like, it's like, if it's expected, like, they're able to set up some kind of like something preventative measures so that there's like a better support system before I go off medication. And how does getting angry at me help the situation? Like, it just made it so much worse. Like, then my mania turned to angry mania, which is great, right? Like, that's just terrible.
Right. No, for real. Like that's what I'm saying. Like it's almost as if they don't want to get to the why of like, you went off your medication. Like, that's and honestly that's pretty normal.
Exactly. There's so many like common themes for why we would do that. Like, it's so obvious in hindsight. And I'm like, it's in hindsight to me, a year after the fact, like, you've been a psychiatrist for how long? And it's not obvious to you yet. I mean,
Right.
and it could be obvious. I don't know.
No, for real. Like I just and preventative care, I know we're kind of like, going against like a lot of things. I would say that preventative care needs to get better because like everybody in the hospital healthcare field is so reactive. Like it's active care, but it's never okay. Here's what you can do to make sure that you don't go off track or you don't get off your medication or you stick to your regimen. Like we don't really do that. We look at it like, oh, let's get in crisis mode.
Yeah.
And then
they'll medicate you with whatever cocktail we think will work. And oh, look, it's not working. So let's try something else that's going to make you feel like crap for 6 weeks. Like, it's just, yeah, I totally agree with you. I always, or after that, I would ask my psychiatrist, like, why don't we have anything like a sponsor where, like an AA, where it's like, if I feel like I'm going to go off my meds or do something that I might regret, like, I can call my sponsor. But there's no similar system. So yeah.
Like, why don't we have like sponsors or accountability partners? And I think they're just leaving it up to us to figure it out.
I guess, I mean, in fairness, I guess they are underfunded and they are overworked, and it is a big undertaking. But like, yeah, it would be a lot of organizational stuff, and I don't know. Someone's got to do it. It's an idea I'm just throwing out there for someone to suck.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then also, I kind of want to like shift gears, but like I really, again, like you wrote a book for children to learn how to also like break this thing. Tell me a little bit more about like the process for making that decision. How have you seen it like helping, or at least you as a mom helping your kids to talk about it more?
Yeah, that's great. I'll try to stay focused. So the process was so simple because basically, as soon as Crazy came out, I was a little bit like, I feel a bit like antsy. And it was a feeling that I recognize now when I'm not writing something, I need to start writing something. I was like, I guess I should start another book. Like, that one's out. So what am I going to follow up with? And then I was like, oh, right. That's what I wanted to do. Because I had already had this inspiration since my kids needed something to read. So the process was really easy. It was remarkable. It was still COVID. And during COVID, I found it, so I don't know how, but I somehow found it very easy to write. And I found I was able to make more time to write and get my books done. So I wrote it very quickly. It was a fast one. And I guess that when I write, like, I have all these ideas kind of percolating for like a year even, or maybe 2 years even, where I'm like walking my dog and I'm thinking like, now how many characters am I going to put in this book? Or like, I'm just kind of thinking about it, and it all kind of stores there. And then it's like, when I'm ready to write, it just comes up. So I'm very lucky that way. So it was a very easy process. My kids they'd grown obviously since the time when I needed it for them, but still my younger two were in the right age group to still, it's really still like 9 to 12-year-olds. So my middle guy and my daughter read it. And they were both, my middle guy is like a super reader. So he was really enthusiastic for me. He was already a little old. He might have been like 12 or 13 when I finished it. But he was like my number one editor. Like he got in there. He gave me suggestions for some things that he thought kids would be like, oh, I don't like this. Like, and like, okay, my daughter did too, but my son was really like into it. So that was great because it really opened up our conversations, and he didn't need the knowledge so much by that point. Like he was already old enough, but I would say to him, like, do you think this is going to be useful? Because it seems like, thankfully, it seems like the kids are talking a lot about mental health in school now. And especially since COVID, there's a lot of conversation about mental health. But like, she always reassured me, like, yeah, I think there will be kids who, even though they hear all of this in school, it's like a different kind of level. Like one of the characters, there's four main characters in my book, Normal. And one of them, her mom was just diagnosed with bipolar. So that was like clearly like taken from our situation. But he was saying like, yeah, I mean, in school, we're learning mostly about like anxiety and depression, which is obviously important, but we're not learning like how to deal with if your mom is diagnosed with bipolar disorder or like some of the more extreme scenarios. So he encouraged me. And since then, I have given it to some local schools, and the librarians in the schools have been like really positive about it, and really, I don't know if they're reading it to their classes, but hopefully, I mean, they were really enthusiastic when I brought it up. Did I answer everything you said? I'm not sure.
That is so, I love that. Like, you know, kids, a lot of the times, like, we underestimate how much kids can, like, in and how introspective they can be. Just starting off young with
Yeah.
like destigmatization, it's very important because, like, as you said, like, that's all becoming more and more of a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
In schools, even professional environments. Now people at work are like, yeah, take a mental health day. I'm like,
Yeah,
like,
we do that. Okay. Yeah.
like we're moving forward, we're making steps in a better direction. But it's so great to see that you're like, helping to cultivate that among children, and like, you know, even preteens too, because they're, yeah, like that demographic is like really introspective at that age, and they're also trying to figure out who they want to be and what mark they want to make in the world, and you know, being open and honest about these things too.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that. I should say it wasn't easy right from the start to talk with my kids. Like, I don't want to make it seem like, oh, well, I just wrote this book and they read it and we all talk like everything perfect. So, when I was first diagnosed, I don't know what they knew when I came out of the hospital. I don't think they knew anything. I don't think my husband had told them very much. I think they were really scared about if I was like dying or like what was going to happen to me. Like, they just didn't know. So at first I would talk to them very little, and I also wasn't ready to talk about it. So at first our conversations were really awkward, and like I would often get very teary and like I would stop talking. And it got easier when I started mentioning people, or if we saw someone on TV who had a mental illness, who especially bipolar, like my daughter really liked Selena Gomez at the time, so I would mention like whoever they could relate to who had this mental illness, and they started being like, and they kind of look at me like, well, that's kind of cool. Like then it started to be like this like cool thing that like celebrities have. So that was like it started just getting a little bit easier to talk about. And I did find some, I think only one children's book at the library, so we read that together, but it wasn't great. So over time it got easier and easier, and yeah, now they don't care. Like now I'm like, whoever so and so is bipolar, and they'll be like, yeah, we know, like whatever. Like it's just not worth mentioning it anymore. Although my son did tell me some rapper, it's not Kanye West, but he told me some rapper he really likes that he was like, he had bipolar, and it was like, oh really? Like now he's bringing it to me, so it felt good, felt like it's become really open. But it did take time. It's been 7 years, so I don't want to make it seem like it was a lot easier than it was, in case anyone gets discouraged.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because like I can only imagine like as a parent of like being in that position and to explain to your kids like what that's like from, you know, your perspective, and like reassure them that mommy is okay. She's with, you know, a condition, and trying to explain like, so honestly that added layer, like I also, a lot of parents especially that are dealing with conditions, because the ability to be able to explain that to kids and the level of vulnerability to do that, like I think that's something that is definitely worth like accomplishing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in our house, for me, it wouldn't have worked any other way. I just would have been too ashamed. And like, I have nothing to be ashamed of. So I just knew it had to be open. I think that's important too, though. I think that the person who's sharing it really has to feel like they want to share it. And like maybe people prefer not to, and that's their choice. I don't know. But for me and for many people that I know, it's like just getting to talk about it, at least with your family, at least with your loved ones. Like it's just the first step towards being open to the world, which takes time, but it can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely great. I also wanted to pose another question.
Okay.
Last one wrap up, but I wanted to know like what advice or like words of encouragement did you have for one who wants to be able to help break the stigma but doesn't know where to begin?
What advice do I have for a person who wants to help break the stigma?
Yeah.
This is a great question. I've been asked this before, so I'm trying to remember the things. There were like 3 or 4 things that I recommended. So the first is learning about that illness. So doing your own learning, figuring stuff out before you like then go and ask questions to the person, and try to just have conversations to let them know that like you're learning, you're trying to support them, and nobody would expect that person to know everything right from the bat. So if the questions are a bit funny, I think any question, to me, any question is welcome. I love it when anyone is interested in bipolar and wants to learn a little bit from me or talk about my experience. It's so validating, I think. So I think learning stuff, asking questions, not being judgmental, like avoiding those cliche kind of, I mean, watching the language so you're not using words like bipolar or crazy or mad or insane in everyday language, like not saying no others bipolar, like just being aware of what you're saying, especially around this other person. And then so for me, another good one is like speaking up for a person who can't speak up for themselves, because many times I've been in a situation where I'm so upset by something and I can't say anything or I can't do anything. Even like just watching a TV show, I sometimes just freeze. I can't even turn it off if it's bothering me. And like my kids or my husband will just turn it off, or like something like that, where it's like if you can just act on the person's behalf in a way that you know is supporting them, instead of being like judgmental and like ignoring it. Like if like definitely don't be judgmental. Like don't be like, oh, just suck it up, and like don't say like those kind of things, obviously, but also don't ignore it. Like to me, I hate it when people ignore the elephant in the room. Like it's right there. Right? Just talk about it. And it's easier for us if someone else starts that conversation a lot of the time. Like a lot of the time we're tired of having to start the conversation all the time. It's like if someone else is just willing to really just learn about it, talk about it, question like the way TV shows and media like portray us, like this general awareness. That's what I would suggest.
Yes. I couldn't agree more with all of that. Like it's so important to learn and also be an advocate, and like and you don't have to go on social media to be an advocate. Like if you hear things, you can just like turn the TV off or also like check somebody and be like, hey, I don't think you should be saying that because that's
Yeah. You just reminded me of the one thing I had mentioned to you before, when my daughter, she came home from school and she was saying that her friends were using the word crazy a lot. And I said, oh, so did you do anything? And I wasn't expecting anything because she was in, I don't know, grade 2, grade 3. Like, I'm not expecting her to be fighting my battles for me. But she said she told them, you shouldn't use the word crazy. It's like a swear for mental illness people. Like something like that. And I was like, wow, that is awesome. Like I just felt so supported in that moment. I'm sure her friends completely ignored it. Like I don't know. Who knows if it had any effect, but maybe it did. Like maybe it affected one of her friends. So yeah, I just felt so like proud that she would be willing to say that on my behalf. I'm getting teary now even.
I'm proud of her too. Like that is amazing. Like I love that.
Thank you.
Well, Cherise, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight, and also everyone who could join and everyone who's watching the replay right now. Wherever you are, thank you so much for joining. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was really great talking to you. I'm sorry for all those technical problems. I told you I'm terrible. like I used to be an engineer. I don't know how. Thank you, Sarah. It was really great to talk to you. And yeah, thank you everyone for watching this.
Yes, of course. Everybody stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges.